Have you ever felt, kind of caught in the middle? On one side, you've got your faith, this deep, personal thing you feel in your heart. And on the other, you've got modern science telling us all this stuff about the world. It almost always feels like this huge conflict where you have to choose a side.
And that right there is the question that sits at the very heart of it all. It's framed as this trap, right? A battlefield that forces you to pick. Are you Team God or are you Team Darwin? It's presented like you absolutely cannot have both. But is that actually true?
And look, the stakes here are incredibly high. This isn't just some abstract debate for scholars to kick around. We're talking about young people feeling like they have to ditch their faith just to be seen as rational. It shuts down real, honest intellectual conversations. And worst of all, it paints science, this amazing tool for understanding God's creation, as the enemy.
Okay, so to untangle this whole mess, we have to go back to the beginning and ask a really basic question. Where did this fight even come from? Is this conflict really an essential part of faith? Or have we just been telling ourselves the wrong story for a long, long time?
So check this out. Scholar Mustafa İSLAMOİşLU puts forward this really powerful idea. He argues that for Muslims, this entire science versus religion showdown, it's actually a borrowed battle. It's an imported conflict that doesn't really have roots inside the Islamic tradition at all. And this quote just cuts right to the heart of it. Historically, in the West, you had the church, which often held this monopoly on knowledge, and it fought tooth and nail against scientific discoveries that seemed to challenge its authority. Which leads to this huge question. Why would a faith like Islam, which never had that kind of centralized church, inherit a war that was never its own to begin with?
And this timeline, wow. Just take a second and let this sink in. We're talking about a full 1,000 years before Darwin ever published his book. You've got Muslim thinkers like Al-Jahiz in the 9th century writing about the struggle for existence. You have An-Nizam, Ibn Miskawayh, Ibn Khaldun, all of them exploring ideas about transformation, about the progression of species. This wasn't some taboo foreign idea. It was part of a rich, ongoing conversation.
So if the conflict is imported, what's the alternative? How do we build a new framework that feels more authentic? Well, İSLAMOİşLU proposes this beautiful way of seeing creation based on what he calls God's two books.
So here's the breakdown. Think of the book of nature, the universe, biology, physics, as the primary text. It is God's creation itself, showing us the what and the how. The Quran, then, is like the guidebook. It doesn't replace the main text, it points to it. It gives us the why and the who. It's the lens that helps us read the book of nature, not just with our eyes, but with a sense of meaning and purpose.
And that's the absolute game changer. The purpose of Scripture isn't to be a biology textbook, it's a book of signs, or ayat. It's like a finger pointing out at the wonder of the universe, encouraging us, heck, commanding us to go out and study the world, to read that primary text for ourselves.
All right, let's put this idea to the test. A very common argument you hear for instantaneous creation comes from this Quranic phrase, kun fayakun. It's almost always translated as be, and it is. Like a sudden magical command. Poof, something just appears out of nowhere in a flash.
But hold on. This is where a deep dive into the original Arabic grammar reveals something absolutely profound. The word fayakun isn't just a simple one-and-done command. The verb tense actually implies an ongoing process, a continuous present and future. So be and it is much more accurately understood as be and it enters a state of becoming. It's not a magic trick. It's the launch of an epic process. That tiny shift changes everything.
So, if creation itself is a process of becoming, then how does that change the way we approach the most sensitive, most difficult part of this whole debate? The story of human origins, the story of atoms.
The secret sauce here is this crucial distinction the Quran makes. It uses two different words. First, there's bashar. Think of this as the biological creature, the physical, hominid form that we can study in fossils. But then there's insan. This is the morally conscious human, the being infused with God's spirit, with intellect and free will. So one is the biological hardware, the other is the conscious software running on it.
And look how this timeline just clicks everything into place. You have the scientific record of hominid evolution, that's the long, slow development of the bashar. And then, at a certain point in that journey, one of these beings is chosen, Adam, and is elevated, becoming the first insan, the first human being gifted with moral responsibility. So in this view, Adam isn't the first biological creature, he's the first morally accountable one.
Okay, I know what you're probably thinking. But wait a minute, what about Eve? What about the whole story of her being created from Adam's rib? That's a huge part of the creation story for so many people.
So, to understand stories like that, scholars have this really important critical tool. It's called Israeliyat. It's basically a category for all those narratives and stories that were absorbed into Islamic culture from older Judeo-Christian sources, but, and this is the most important part, are not actually found in the Quran itself. You can think of them as cultural imports, not scriptural truths.
So let's just run the rib story through a simple 3-step filter. Ready? Step 1. Does it align with the Quran? Nope, not there. Step 2. Does it align with the book of nature, with biology? Definitely not. And step 3. Can we trace its origins back to a pre-Islamic source? Yes, we can. The story fails on every count, which shows us that it's an import, not an authentic part of the revelation.
So after all of this, where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway? Well, we've basically dismantled the false conflict, and in its place, we found this powerful new paradigm that lets us move way beyond that impossible choice we started with.
And this new paradigm really centers on this beautiful concept called sunnatullah, which means God's way or God's system. These are the unbreakable laws and processes, like gravity or the laws of physics, that God uses to govern the universe. And from this perspective, evolution is no longer some random, godless theory. It is the very method, the very system, the sunnatullah, that God uses for creation itself. And this right here, this is the whole journey on one slide. We move from that old trap of creation versus evolution to this new paradigm of creation through evolution. We go from faith or science to faith and science. And we shift our image of God from, say, a simple potter just molding clay, to a divine lawgiver, the brilliant architect of the elegant processes that bring the entire universe into being. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. It has a real profound impact on people's lives. The author of these ideas got a message from a biology professor who said that after reading this, he was able to reconnect with the God he had felt forced to say goodbye to years ago. I mean, that is the power of dismantling a false choice.
And that leaves us with one last, really crucial question to think about. If we can accept that nature itself is a divine text, a book filled with God's signs just waiting to be understood, what do we really lose when we refuse to even open it and read?